The envelope arrived just after sunrise, resting inside the polished brass mailbox like it had been placed there with intention. It was heavier than regular mail, stiff at the corners, and stamped with aggressive red lettering that immediately disrupted the peaceful rhythm of the street. Cease and desist. Immediate action required. Keanu Reeves noticed it the moment he returned from his morning motorcycle ride, the low hum of the engine fading as he pulled into the driveway. He stood still for a second, helmet in hand, scanning the quiet neighborhood, manicured lawns, dew still clinging to the grass, the soft creak of a swing moving gently in a nearby yard. Everything felt calm, ordinary, except that envelope. Something about it didn't belong, like a threat whispered into an otherwise gentle morning. Inside the house, Keanu set the letter on the kitchen counter and poured himself a cup of coffee, letting the steam rise as he finally opened it. The language was cold, formal, and carefully crafted to intimidate. The Homeowners Association accused him of unauthorized structures, improper use of residential property, and activities encouraging public congregation. There were no photos attached, no specific incidents cited, just broad claims wrapped in legal phrasing. The final paragraph carried weight, threatening fines, litigation, and immediate enforcement if compliance wasn't achieved within 7 days. Keanu read it twice, not with panic or anger, but with quiet focus. Outside the window, his small front yard library stood peacefully in the morning light, a simple wooden structure, neatly painted, filled with well-loved books. A handwritten sign read, "Take 1. Leave 1. Or just read." 4 months, it had brought nothing but calm. Children stopping by after school, elderly neighbors pausing during their walks, even the occasional passerby finding shade and silence. According to the HOA, that simple act of sharing knowledge was now a violation. By mid-morning, the tension had begun to ripple through the neighborhood. Mrs. Carter from across the street walked over slowly, concern etched across her face. She lowered her voice when she spoke, as if the houses themselves might be listening. "Keanu, I heard the HOA finally sent you something," she said, glancing toward the library. "They're saying it's attracting too much attention. They're talking about fines." Keanu listened patiently, nodding, offering a calm smile that didn't quite answer her question. Others drove by more slowly than usual, eyes lingering, curiosity replacing the easy friendliness that once defined the street. Later that afternoon, 2 HOA board members appeared, clipboards tucked tightly under their arms. They didn't knock. They didn't introduce themselves. They walked the perimeter of his property, took photos, whispered to each other, and left without a word. The message was clear. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It was enforcement. That evening, the emails started arriving. First one, then several more, each sharper in tone than the last. Legal terminology replaced polite reminders. Attorneys were copied. Deadlines were emphasized. Words like precedent, penalty, and mandatory compliance were repeated as if volume alone could force surrender. Keanu didn't respond to any of them. Instead, long after the neighborhood lights dimmed, he sat alone at his desk, laptop open, quietly researching state property law and community access statutes. He cross-referenced HOA bylaws with municipal codes, highlighting discrepancies, marking clauses that had been overlooked or misunderstood. What the board didn't know, what they never bothered to investigate, was that the library wasn't just a kind gesture. It was registered. It was compliant. And under state law, it was protected. Near midnight, Keanu closed the laptop, the soft click echoing in the quiet room. He didn't draft a reply. He didn't issue a warning. He sent one short message to a legal foundation specializing in community rights. The HOA believed they had issued a cease and desist. In reality, they had just triggered something far bigger. And they had no idea what was coming next. The next morning, the neighborhood woke up to something it had never seen before. Official HOA notices taped to doors bright yellow paper flapping in the breeze like warnings no one could ignore. Keanu's house had 3 of them. One on the front door. One on the garage. One carefully placed beside the little library, partially covering the handwritten sign. The notices declared him in active noncompliance and warned that daily fines would begin immediately. As the sun climbed higher, neighbors stepped outside, reading their own doors, then glancing toward Keanu's property with unease. The quiet street felt different now, less like a community, more like a monitored zone. Children hesitated before stopping at the library. Parents pulled them back gently, unsure of what rules they might accidentally break just by standing there too long. By midday, the HOA had escalated from paperwork to presence. A white SUV with the association's logo parked across the street, idling for nearly an hour. 2 board members sat inside, occasionally stepping out to take photos, jot notes, and make pointed phone calls. When Keanu finally walked outside, one of them approached with a tight, rehearsed smile. "Mr. Reeves," she said, extending a clipboard instead of a hand, "this is a formal request for immediate compliance. We've received multiple complaints." Keanu asked calmly, "Complaints from who?" The woman hesitated, then replied, "Residents. No names. No details. Just authorities spoken aloud, as if that alone made it real." She reminded him that fines were now accruing daily and hinted that the board was prepared to pursue legal action swiftly. Keanu thanked her for the information and walked back inside without another word, leaving the board members visibly unsettled by his refusal to engage on their terms. That afternoon, the HOA's pressure took a more personal turn. A carefully worded email was sent to every resident in the community, framing the situation as a matter of neighborhood safety and property values. It implied that Keanu's actions encouraged outsiders to linger and created potential liability for the association. The language was subtle but effective, fear dressed as concern. Whispers spread quickly. Some neighbors avoided eye contact. Others watched from behind curtains. A few, however, quietly pushed back. An elderly man left a note inside the library thanking Keanu for giving him a reason to walk every day. A young mother slipped a book into the box with a message scribbled inside, "Asterisk, this helped my son learn to love reading." Asterisk, the HOA saw numbers and rules. The neighborhood saw something human, and the divide was growing. As night fell, another letter arrived, this one hand-delivered and far more aggressive. It threatened liens, legal fees, and forced removal of the unauthorized structure at Keanu's expense. The tone was no longer professional. It was punitive. Keanu read it once, set it down, and stepped outside. He stood beside the library, running his hand across the smooth wood, listening to the quiet hum of the street. A few porch lights flicked on as neighbors watched silently. Then Keanu did something the HOA didn't anticipate. He posted a small printed notice beside the library. Not defiant. Not emotional. Just factual. It explained the library's registration, its compliance with state law, and its purpose as a community resource. At the bottom, one sentence stood out: "This matter is now being reviewed by legal counsel." The HOA thought pressure would break him. Instead, it had drawn a line, and on the other side of that line, Keanu Reeves was standing calmly, completely unafraid. The HOA mistook Keanu's silence for hesitation. Days passed without a formal response, no angry email, no public statement, no visible concession. To the board, it felt like momentum, proof that pressure was working. Fines continued to accumulate on paper, notices were logged, and internal emails buzzed with confidence. But inside Keanu's home, the atmosphere was entirely different. Late each night, long after the neighborhood settled into darkness, his living room glowed softly with the light of a laptop screen. Legal documents covered the coffee table in neat stacks, each one marked with handwritten notes. Keanu moved slowly and deliberately, reading statutes line by line, not as someone scrambling for a defense, but as someone assembling a plan. This wasn't about reacting, it was about positioning. The legal foundation he had contacted responded quickly, assigning him a senior attorney known for handling cases involving HOA overreach and community access rights. Their first conversation was quiet and precise, stripped of drama. The attorney confirmed what Keanu had already suspected. The HOA had acted without proper investigation, misapplied its own bylaws, and, most critically, issued a cease-and-desist without verifying whether they even had jurisdiction. Together, they reviewed municipal codes that protected small community libraries and non-profit access points. The library, it turned out, wasn't just compliant, it was shielded under state law as a registered community resource. Any attempt to remove it could expose the HOA to legal liability. Keanu didn't smile when he heard this. He simply nodded, already thinking 2 steps ahead. While the HOA prepared enforcement measures, Keanu prepared evidence. He collected emails, photographed the posted notices, and documented the board members' unannounced inspections. He gathered written statements from neighbors, some hesitant, others eager, who described how the library had helped their children, their routines, their sense of connection. Each statement was signed, dated, and notarized. This wasn't an emotional appeal, it was a factual record. Meanwhile, his attorney drafted a response letter, not to threaten, but to inform. It outlined the legal protections the HOA had ignored, cited specific statutes they had violated, and warned, calmly, that continued harassment could be interpreted as retaliation. The tone was respectful, measured, and devastatingly precise. It wasn't a counterattack. It was a mirror, forcing the HOA to look at its own mistakes. On the fifth day, as the deadline loomed, the letter was sent, certified, tracked, and copied to the association's legal counsel. Keanu didn't announce it. He didn't share it with neighbors. He went about his routine as usual, riding his motorcycle in the morning, nodding politely to those who passed by. But the effect was immediate. That afternoon, the white HOA SUV returned, this time staying only a few minutes. The board's emails slowed. The tone shifted. Words like enforcement quietly disappeared, replaced by review and asterisk discussion. Asterisk behind closed doors, the board scrambled. Their attorney flagged the cease-and-desist as potentially unlawful. The fines they'd threatened? Unenforceable. The inspections? Improper. The narrative they'd built began to collapse under its own weight. That evening, Keanu stood once more beside the little library as the sun dipped below the horizon. A neighbor stopped by, then another. A child returned a book and chose a new one. No announcements were made, but the mood had changed. The HOA had tried to assert control through intimidation, and in doing so, they had handed Keanu something far more powerful than leverage. They had handed him proof. Proof of overreach. Proof of misconduct. Proof that, if this went to court, the outcome would be public, permanent, and deeply embarrassing. The board still believed they had options. They didn't realize yet that the game was already decided. Keanu hadn't raised his voice. He hadn't broken a rule. He had simply made one legal move, and it was about to end everything. The courtroom was smaller than the HOA board had expected, but it felt heavier, like every word spoken inside would echo far beyond its walls. Morning light filtered through tall windows, illuminating polished wooden benches and the quiet authority of the judge's desk at the front. Keanu Reeves entered without fanfare, dressed simply, his posture relaxed but attentive. He took his seat beside his attorney, nodding politely as if this were just another appointment in an ordinary day. Across the aisle, the HOA board members sat stiffly with their legal counsel, whispering urgently, papers spread like shields in front of them. Their confidence from weeks earlier was gone, replaced by tight expressions and restless glances toward the judge's chair. When the session began, the HOA's attorney stood first, launching into a rehearsed explanation about community standards and preserving property values. The words sounded familiar, polished, vague, and carefully detached from specifics. He referenced bylaws without citing page numbers, spoke of resident complaints without naming a single complainant, and framed the little library as a potential liability. The judge listened silently, occasionally making notes, occasionally raising an eyebrow when claims drifted into speculation. When the attorney finished, he sat down with a subtle confidence, as though authority alone would carry the argument. That confidence lasted exactly 3 seconds. The judge turned to Keanu's attorney and said calmly, "Let's hear the response." Keanu's attorney rose slowly, opening a single folder instead of a stack. His tone was measured, almost conversational, but every sentence landed with precision. He began by addressing jurisdiction, how the HOA had issued a cease-and-desist without verifying its authority under state law. He cited exact statutes, reading them aloud, each one dismantling a piece of the HOA's case. Then came the evidence: the improperly posted notices, the unauthorized inspections, the escalating threats of fines and liens without due process. One by one, the judge reviewed each document, flipping pages deliberately, the silence growing heavier with every turn. Finally, the attorney addressed the heart of the matter, the library itself. He explained its registration, its legal protections, and its classification as a community access resource. In short, he concluded, the HOA attempted enforcement where it had none, and in doing so, exposed itself to legal liability. The room shifted. The HOA attorney stood again, this time less assured, attempting to rebut points that were now firmly grounded in law. He argued intent, misunderstanding, procedural discretion. The judge listened, then asked a single question that changed everything. Did the association verify compliance before issuing the cease and desist? The answer was a pause. A glance. Then a reluctant, "No, Your Honor." The judge leaned back slightly, hands folded. And did the association consider state protections for registered community resources? Another pause. "No, Your Honor." The weight of those admissions settled over the courtroom like a verdict forming in real time. Keanu remained still, eyes forward, calm as ever. The judge spoke again, his voice firm but controlled. He explained that HOAs, while empowered, were not above the law, and that authority exercised without diligence became overreach. He ruled that the cease and desist was invalid, the fines unenforceable, and the HOA's actions improper. He warned the board that continued harassment could result in sanctions. Then, almost as an aside, he addressed Keanu directly. "Mr. Reeves," he said, "you acted within your rights and with restraint. That matters." The gavel came down once, sharp and final. As the courtroom emptied, the HOA board sat frozen, the reality sinking in. They hadn't just lost a case. They had lost control of the narrative. And standing quietly beside his attorney, Keanu Reeves hadn't raised his voice, but he had been heard. The courtroom emptied slowly, but the consequences of the ruling moved fast. Within hours, the HOA's legal counsel sent a carefully worded notice to the entire board, outlining the judge's findings in unmistakable terms. The cease and desist was void. The fines were unenforceable. The association's actions, documented, dated, and now part of the public record, had crossed from authority into liability. That evening, an emergency HOA meeting was called. The same board members who once spoke confidently about compliance now sat in silence, the room thick with embarrassment and unease. Their attorney explained what the judge hadn't needed to say out loud. If the association continued its behavior, it could face sanctions, civil penalties, and even personal exposure for board members who had acted recklessly. Control, the thing they valued most, had slipped completely out of their hands. By the next morning, the neighborhood felt different. Gone were the yellow notices and the idling white SUV. In their place was a formal letter from the HOA addressed to all residents. It announced the immediate withdrawal of all enforcement actions related to Keanu's property and confirmed that the community library was fully compliant with state and municipal law. There was no apology, just stiff, legal phrasing, but everyone understood what it meant. Neighbors began stopping by again, this time without hesitation. Parents lingered as their children browsed books. Elderly residents stayed to chat. Someone brought fresh flowers and placed them beside the library. Another left a small handwritten sign that read, "Thank you for standing your ground." Keanu didn't make a speech. He didn't call attention to the moment. He simply nodded, smiled, and let the community reclaim what had always been theirs. Behind closed doors, the fallout continued. 2 HOA board members quietly resigned within weeks, citing personal reasons. New elections were scheduled. The association's bylaws were reviewed, this time with legal oversight, and enforcement procedures were rewritten to prevent future overreach. The story spread beyond the neighborhood, picked up by local blogs and community forums as an example of what happens when authority goes unchecked. But Keanu never participated in the attention. When asked later why he didn't push for damages or public apologies, his answer was simple: it wasn't about winning. It was about stopping something wrong. That restraint, more than the ruling itself, left the deepest impression. One evening, as the sun dipped low and the street settled into its familiar quiet, Keanu stood beside the little library once more. A young boy approached, book in hand, nervous but excited. "Mr. Reeves," he said, "are they going to take it away again?" Keanu knelt slightly to meet his eyes. "No," he said gently. "Not now. Not ever." The boy smiled and ran off, clutching the book like a treasure. Around them, porch lights flickered on, neighbors waved, and the soft hum of a peaceful community returned. The HOA had tried to assert power through fear. Keanu had responded with knowledge, patience, and one perfectly timed legal move. And in doing so, he reminded everyone watching that sometimes the strongest victories don't come from shouting, but from standing firm, knowing the law, and refusing to back down.